It began on a day that felt perfectly ordinary, the kind of morning Kelly Ripa loved. Sunlight spilling into the living room, the smell of roasting coffee drifting through the apartment, and the familiar sound of Mark Consuelos humming some old song that he always butchered but swore he sang beautifully. Everything felt calm, peaceful, and almost too perfect to predict what was about to unfold. Kelly had been getting ready for the day, talking to herself in the mirror, practicing a joke she wanted to tell later. She always rehearsed jokes, even though she knew she'd deliver them better on the spot. Meanwhile, Mark was in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast, even though everyone knew the man was a magician on TV, but a menace in the kitchen. That morning, he insisted he was going to surprise Kelly with the perfect omelet. The problem was, Mark's definition of perfect usually meant questionable but sincere. Kelly smiled when she heard him open cabinets way too aggressively. Then she heard utensils crash loudly. Then came a muffled curse, then silence. At first, she laughed to herself, probably another egg disaster. But silence wasn't Mark's style. Silence meant something wasn't right. When she finally walked into the kitchen, she found Mark leaning over the counter, one hand pressed against his chest, eyes closed tightly. Kelly froze for half a second, her heart dropping. She called his name sharply, and he looked up with a strained expression she almost never saw on him. He said he felt dizzy, his chest felt tight, his breathing felt strange. It came out slowly, as if he was trying to hide how scared he really was. Kelly didn't waste a second. She rushed to him, placing her hands on his cheeks, her voice rising with panic she tried to hide. Mark tried to joke that he was fine, that maybe the omelet had fought back. Kelly didn't laugh. She felt her throat tighten. Within minutes, she was leading him out the door, her hand gripping his, refusing to let go. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every second carved a deeper fear into her chest. They reached the clinic quickly, but for Kelly, it felt like the longest journey she had taken in years. Mark sat quietly beside her in the waiting room, but she could tell he was shaken. He wasn't complaining, he wasn't making jokes, he wasn't even pretending to be strong. That frightened her more than anything. Kelly's thoughts spiraled endlessly. What if something was wrong? What if she lost the man who had been her world for decades? What if their mornings, their laughter, their late-night talks were suddenly stolen away? She squeezed his hand harder, and he squeezed back, forcing a small smile as if saying, "I'm still here," but the fear didn't loosen, it only grew. When the nurse called Mark's name, Kelly walked with him, refusing to sit outside. She stayed by his side through every test, every question, every examination. Mark tried to lighten the mood. He joked about joining a medical drama series because he was doing so many tests. He joked that the blood pressure cuff was hugging him too aggressively. He joked that he never got this much attention unless he messed up laundry. Kelly appreciated every attempt, but she could barely smile. Her mind was a storm, secretly tearing itself apart. Hours passed before the doctor finally returned. The suspense was unbearable. Kelly's fingers kept tapping against her leg anxiously. Mark's breathing steadied, but she could tell he was nervous too. The doctor sat across from them and began explaining the results, calmly, gently, carefully, and with every sentence that followed, Kelly felt her chest ease slightly. The tightness she'd been carrying all day began to loosen. It wasn't a heart condition, it wasn't an emergency, it wasn't life-threatening. Kelly lowered her head into her hands and cried silently, overwhelmed by relief. Not dramatic wailing, not fear anymore, just raw emotion pouring out after hours of holding herself together. Mark touched her knee gently, whispering her name, telling her everything was okay, that he wasn't going anywhere. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead, reminding her softly that he loved her, that he hated scaring her, that he was sorry. Kelly didn't care about apologies. She just held him tightly, breathing him in, grounding herself in the warmth she thought she might lose. On the ride home, Kelly clung to his arm like he might disappear if she let go. Mark teased her, saying he was flattered by all the attention. She rolled her eyes and told him not to ruin the moment. But then she smiled, because only Mark could turn fear into something soft and gentle. Back home, Kelly insisted he lie down and rest, practically forcing him on the couch. Mark protested dramatically, saying he was fine, stronger than ever. Kelly shut him up by placing a pillow on his chest and threatening to sit on him if he didn't stay still. She brought him water, checked his temperature even though the doctor said he was fine, and kept watching him like a hawk. Mark teased her for being an adorable control freak. Kelly reminded him he gave her the scare of her life, so he deserved all the overprotective energy she had. They spent the next few hours cuddled up together, wrapped in blankets, watching movies. Mark rested his head on her shoulder while she played with his hair, occasionally poking him just to make sure he was actually awake and not faking rest to escape responsibilities. He promised he'd slow down. He promised he'd take care of himself. He promised he'd stop acting like a superhero who didn't need rest. Kelly laughed, telling him he didn't need to be a superhero. He just needed to be there, with her, safe, healthy, smiling, breathing. That was enough. Later, when the shock faded and she finally talked about it publicly, Kelly's voice cracked as she described how terrified she'd been, how the moment she saw Mark gripping his chest, she felt her entire world lurch, how the relief she felt when the doctor said he'd be okay was undescribable. Kelly made it clear that love isn't always about glamour and laughter. Sometimes it's about fear, vulnerability, and moments that remind you just how fragile life can be and how strong the bond between two people becomes when tested. Through it all, Mark stood beside her, kissing her cheek, whispering jokes, reminding her she was her anchor, even when she felt like she was falling apart. Their love story didn't falter. It didn't break. It grew deeper. A simple scare became a powerful reminder of their devotion, and in the quiet that followed, Kelly realized she didn't just love Mark, she needed him, not because he was perfect, but because he was hers, her partner, her home, her heartbeat in human form. And as for Mark, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: nothing was stronger than the woman who held him through fear, through laughter, and through every storm life could throw their way. Together, they faced a terrifying moment. Together, they found relief, and together they stepped back into their world more connected, more grateful, and more in love than ever.